20 students vanished in 1994. After 30 years, their missing school bus was finally discovered in the woods. It was a cloudy morning in 1994 when the yellow school bus left the gates of Riverside High School. Inside, 20 children laughed, shouted, and shared snacks, never imagining their ride home would become one of the most chilling mysteries in town history. The bus never reached its destination. Parents waited anxiously at bus stops, watching as daylight faded into night. Police combed highways, bridges, and neighborhoods, but no sign of the children or the driver was found. It was as if the bus had been swallowed by the earth itself. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the driver was part of a sinister plan. Others whispered about a dangerous bend near the river where buses often struggled. But no evidence ever surfaced. The families were left with unbearable silence and decades of unanswered questions. Years passed. Birthdays, graduations, and weddings came and went without those missing children. Parents grew old carrying grief, yet candles still flickered every anniversary of the disappearance. The case became folklore, a ghost story parents told their kids to keep them from wandering too far into the woods. Then, 3 decades later, a group of hikers stumbled upon something strange deep in the overgrown forest. Rusted metal peeked out from a thick wall of vines. Clearing the brush, they froze. It was the bus. The very same school bus that had vanished in 1994, almost perfectly hidden under the weight of nature's grip. Inside, tattered books lay scattered on the floor. Faded drawings still clung to the seats. But the most disturbing detail was the silence. The bus was empty. No remains, no sign of struggle, just echoes of 20 young lives that had disappeared without a trace. For investigators, it reopened every wound. How had a full-sized bus vanished so completely for 30 years within just miles of the town? Why were there no footprints, no evidence, no explanation? The forest had swallowed its secret, but the discovery only deepened the mystery. Some believe the children were taken elsewhere that day, the bus planted as a cover. Others think the woods hold darker secrets than anyone dares to imagine. The truth remains hidden, but one fact is undeniable. 20 children left school one afternoon and were never seen again. And 30 years later, their empty bus still waits in the shadows of the forest, guarding its unanswered questions. Introduction of the mystery. In the quiet town of Riverside, 1994 began like any other year. Parents sent their children to school, buses came and went, and life seemed ordinary. But one cloudy afternoon, everything changed in a way no one could have predicted. A yellow school bus, filled with 20 students, left the gates of Riverside High School, and it was never seen again. What began as an ordinary school day quickly transformed into a nightmare. The children, ranging from ages 9 to 14, were supposed to return home before dusk. Parents waited at bus stops, eyes fixed on the road, expecting to see that familiar yellow bus come rolling down. But as the minutes turned into hours, an uneasy silence replaced the sound of laughter and footsteps. At first, there was hope. Parents thought perhaps the bus had broken down. Some believed there was a traffic delay or a detour. But as night crept in and the streets stayed empty, fear took hold. Calls flooded the police station. Where was bus number 57, and why hadn't it arrived? Within hours, the local police began a frantic search. Helicopters scanned highways. Officers checked riversides, bridges, and abandoned roads. Volunteers carried flashlights into the woods, shouting the names of the children. But the night ended with nothing. No sound of children, no sight of a bus, no clue at all. The disappearance shocked everyone because it seemed impossible. A school bus is not a small object that could vanish without notice. It was large, bright yellow, and hard to miss. How could it simply disappear between school and home? That single question echoed in every household of Riverside. The town became a place of fear overnight. Parents refused to let their children out of sight. School corridors that once rang with laughter now echoed with silence and whispers. Teachers stood helpless, unable to explain what had happened to their students. For the first time, The community felt the weight of something far bigger than them, a mystery that defied reason. Every missing face became a symbol of the tragedy. Photographs of the 20 children, once proudly displayed on refrigerators and family albums, now hung on telephone poles, store windows, and church boards. Their smiles looked back at a town drowning in grief and disbelief. The driver of the bus, Mr. Harold, was also missing. Known as a quiet man in his 50s, he had driven that route for years without incident. Neighbors described him as polite, disciplined, and punctual. His sudden disappearance, alongside the children, added another chilling layer to the puzzle. The media soon descended upon Riverside. News anchors described it as the most baffling disappearance in decades. Reporters swarmed the town, cameras flashing, but even under national attention, the bus remained missing. Every theory felt empty without proof. Every lead collapsed into silence. And so, what began as an ordinary school day turned into one of the darkest chapters in the town's history. 20 children left school, excited to go home, and a trusted driver took the wheel. Yet somewhere on that short route, something happened, something no one could explain, something that swallowed them whole, leaving behind nothing but questions and fear. The last known journey. The last confirmed sighting of the bus was at exactly 3:15 p.m. when it rolled out of the school gates. Children inside waved from the windows, some laughing, some playfully pressing their palms against the glass. Teachers who watched them leave remembered it vividly. It looked like nothing more than an ordinary ride home. The driver, Mr. Harold, sat calmly behind the wheel, his cap tilted slightly forward as always. He nodded to the school guard at the gate before turning the bus onto the familiar road. For years, this routine had been the same. Every bump, every turn, every stop was part of a predictable rhythm. But on that day, the rhythm broke. The bus was expected to make 5 stops along the Riverside route. Parents waited at each stop, some with younger siblings in tow, others holding grocery bags, ready to welcome their children home. At the first stop, no bus arrived. At the second, parents grew uneasy. By the third stop, whispers began. Why is it late? Where's the bus? A witness later claimed she saw the bus pass near the Old Mill Road, a place the driver rarely used. She recalled the yellow blur moving quickly past her house, faster than usual, as though rushing somewhere. But her account was never confirmed, and no one else came forward to support it. The bus's last direction became as mysterious as its disappearance. Along the route, the children were full of energy. Some carried sports bags from after-school practice, while others clutched drawings and projects to show their parents. One boy, seated near the back, had been telling jokes so loudly that even people standing by the roadside could hear the laughter spilling from the open bus windows. That was the last sound anyone ever heard from them. Neighbors along the route later reported something strange: silence. They expected the familiar rattling of the school bus engine and the cheerful noise of children, but on that day, there was nothing. It was as though the bus had taken a turn into a world no one could see. When the first parent called the school to ask why the bus hadn't arrived, administrators were puzzled. They checked with the transport office, but the log showed everything had departed on time. There were no mechanical issues reported, no emergency calls from the driver, no warnings of a delay. As the evening wore on, parents began to drive the route themselves. They traced every corner, every turn, every possible shortcut the driver might have taken. But the road was empty, and there were no tire marks, no debris, not even a single clue to suggest a bus had traveled there at all. It was as if the bus had rolled off the face of the earth within minutes of leaving the school. No skid marks, no signs of an accident, and no reports of a large vehicle veering off the road. The absence of evidence made the situation all the more terrifying. The last known journey of bus number 57 became the central piece of the puzzle. Everyone knew where it started, but no one knew where it ended. That short trip from school to home, usually so simple, now stood as one of the most haunting mysteries in the town's history, an unfinished journey that left a community paralyzed with fear. Immediate search efforts. When the bus failed to arrive at its first stops, parents assumed it was only a minor delay. But by nightfall, worry turned into panic. Calls began pouring into the local police station, each one more frantic than the last. "My child isn't home yet," one mother cried. "The bus should have been here hours ago." By 7 p.m., search teams were deployed. Patrol cars swept along highways, their sirens echoing through the quiet streets. Officers traced every road leading out of the school, shining powerful beams into ditches, bridges, and roadside fields. But the yellow bus was nowhere in sight. Helicopters were dispatched from the nearest city, their floodlights cutting through the darkness as they hovered over winding roads and riverbanks. From above, the land stretched out in eerie silence. No glowing headlights, no large vehicle hidden in the brush, just shadows and silence. Volunteers poured into the search, carrying flashlights and lanterns as they combed the woods. Parents joined them, shouting their children's names into the night air, hoping for a voice to answer back. But the only reply was the rustle of leaves and the distant call of night creatures. The local river was searched extensively. Divers plunged into the cold, dark water, expecting to find the bus submerged after an accident. But the river gave up nothing. No twisted metal, no broken glass, no sign of a crash. It was as if the bus had simply avoided the river entirely. Roadblocks were set up on every major road. Truckers, drivers, and travelers were questioned. "Did you see a school bus? Did you notice anything unusual?" Yet every single answer came back the same. Nobody had seen bus number 57. Not a single person. By midnight, the small police force was stretched thin. Maps were laid out across tables inside the station, marked with red pins for every potential route the bus could have taken. Officers stared at the maps in disbelief. There were only so many roads in and out of town, and they had checked them all. The search expanded beyond Riverside, into neighboring towns and counties. Radio stations broadcast urgent alerts. Television anchors repeated the same question that was burning through every home. Where is the missing school bus carrying 20 children? Despite the intensity of the search, there were no tire marks, no broken fences, and no signs of forced entry on rural paths. It baffled investigators. A vehicle as large as a school bus couldn't vanish without leaving a trace. Yet that night ended in total silence, with nothing but unanswered questions. As the hours stretched into dawn, search teams returned exhausted, carrying heavy hearts and empty hands. Parents who had waited at bus stops through the night stood trembling, unable to accept the horrifying reality that their children were gone and the town's biggest search had uncovered nothing at all. The rise of theories. When the bus failed to appear after hours of searching, fear slowly gave way to speculation. Everyone in town had their own theory about what could have happened. Some believed it was a tragic accident waiting to be discovered, while others were certain something more sinister had taken place. Theories began to spread like wildfire, each one darker than the last. The first and most common idea was that the bus had plunged into the river. The winding roads near Riverside had sharp turns, and drivers often struggled with them. People imagined the bus sliding off the wet ground and sinking beneath the surface, taking all 20 children with it. But divers searched tirelessly, and the river revealed nothing. That theory soon crumbled. The second theory was more disturbing, that the driver, Mr. Harold, had deliberately vanished with the children. Whispers filled the streets. What if he planned this? What if he betrayed the families who trusted him? Some pointed out that he lived alone, had no close relatives, and rarely spoke outside of work. But those who knew him insisted he was kind, reliable, and incapable of such a crime. Another theory spread among the older residents of Riverside. They spoke of the forest that bordered the bus route, a place avoided by many after dark. According to town folklore, the woods had a history of disappearances. Hunters swore they heard voices at night, and children were told never to wander too far. Some claimed the bus had gone into those woods and never come out. The more logical minds turned to the possibility of an abduction. Could the bus have been hijacked? Could armed men have forced the driver off course and taken the children? But no one had reported suspicious vehicles or strangers that day. And with so many families waiting along the route, How could an entire bus be taken without anyone noticing? Theories grew wilder as days passed. Some residents whispered about underground tunnels left over from old military operations, where the bus might have been hidden. Others spoke of secret cults that operated in the shadows, searching for children for unknown rituals. Each night, rumors twisted into more chilling shapes, feeding the town's fear. The media added fuel to the fire. National newspapers ran headlines like "Driver turns villain" and "Was it a mass abduction?" Talk shows invited experts to discuss every possibility, from human trafficking to paranormal phenomena. The spotlight only deepened the mystery, but gave the families no comfort. Paranormal investigators even arrived, claiming that the area carried an energy disturbance. They suggested the bus had slipped into another dimension or vanished into a time loop. Parents of the missing children dismissed such theories in anger, but others clung to them. Because no rational answer seemed to fit in hushed conversations, some even blamed the town itself. They believed Riverside carried a curse, that the land had absorbed something dark from its history. Old-timers recalled accidents, missing persons, and tragedies dating back decades. For them, the missing bus was not the first sign of the curse, only the worst. But no matter how many theories emerged, none came with proof. The bus left the school at 3:15 p.m. 20 children were inside. A trusted driver was at the wheel. Beyond that, everything dissolved into rumor and speculation. And as theories multiplied, so did the dread that perhaps the truth was stranger than any of them could imagine. Impact on families. For the families, the night of the disappearance was only the beginning of an endless torment. Mothers stood at bus stops long after midnight, clutching the hands of younger children, refusing to leave. Fathers drove the same roads again and again, headlights piercing the darkness, convinced that if they searched one more time, they might see the yellow bus emerge from the shadows. Inside homes, unanswered phones echoed like warnings. Some parents dialed hospitals in desperation, hoping their child was injured but alive somewhere. Others sat in silence, staring at the clock, whispering prayers under their breath. No matter how strong their faith, every passing hour without answers cut deeper into their hope. In the days that followed, family photographs took on a haunting weight. Smiling faces and school portraits became unbearable reminders of what was missing. Kitchens filled with untouched lunches. Bedrooms were left as they were that morning, backpacks by the door, shoes kicked off near the bed, like small museums of interrupted lives. The grief quickly spread beyond individual homes. Whole neighborhoods felt hollow, as if an invisible hand had stolen the very sound of laughter from their streets. Parents who still had children became overprotective, clutching them tightly, walking them to school, and never letting them out of sight. Trust in the world was broken. Some families grew bitter, lashing out at the police for failing to find even a single clue. Town hall meetings became emotional battlegrounds, with fathers shouting at officials, demanding answers that never came. Others clung desperately to the search teams, volunteering night after night, unwilling to admit defeat. The strain tested marriages. Couples who once stood united now fought bitterly, blaming each other for sending their child on the bus that morning, for not noticing warning signs, for not doing more. Grief carved cracks into families, leaving many broken in ways that could never be repaired. Yet for some, grief became ritual. Every evening, candles flickered outside homes, lined up along fences and windows. Vigils were held in churches, with prayers repeated so often that even the children left behind knew them by heart. The missing bus was not just a story, it was a daily wound, reopened every morning. The siblings of the vanished children carried their own scars. They grew up in the shadows of absence, hearing constant whispers about the brothers and sisters they had lost. Some wore their missing siblings' clothes. Others slept clutching their toys, too afraid to let go. Childhood in Riverside was forever changed. The impact rippled far beyond Riverside itself. Relatives traveled from other states, joining searches, bringing food, comforting parents. Grandparents sat silently in living rooms, tears streaming down their faces as they replayed the last phone calls, the last hugs, the last words they had exchanged with their grandchildren. As weeks turned into months, the families lived in a state of suspended reality, unable to mourn, unable to move on, because there were no bodies, no graves, no answers. Their children were not declared dead, yet they were gone. That torment of loving someone who vanished without a trace became the heaviest burden the families of Riverside would ever carry: the forgotten case. In the first few months after the disappearance, the case consumed every headline. Newspapers splashed the children's faces across their front pages, and television anchors spoke their names each night. But as time passed and no answers came, the media slowly turned away. What had once been breaking news began to fade into the background. For the families, this silence felt like betrayal. They had begged the world to keep looking, to keep asking questions, but soon new tragedies elsewhere stole the spotlight. Riverside's missing bus became just another cold case file, tucked into archives with other unsolved mysteries. Police officers who had once worked tirelessly on the case were reassigned. Search teams dwindled. Funding dried up. The maps once covered in pins and markers were rolled away and stored in dusty cabinets. The once bustling police station, filled with reporters and frantic parents, returned to its ordinary routines. In town, the disappearance began to transform into legend. Children born after 1994 grew up hearing whispers about the bus that never returned. Parents used the story to warn their kids: don't stay out late. Don't wander into the woods. Remember what happened to those children. The case became less a tragedy and more a cautionary tale. Some residents couldn't bear to talk about it anymore. They avoided the subject in conversations, steering clear of the pain it carried. Others refused to let it die, placing flowers each year along the old bus route, leaving handwritten notes that said things like "still waiting for you" or "never forgotten." The longer the case remained unsolved, the more it divided the town. Some believed it was best to move on, to stop reopening old wounds. Others accused the authorities of covering up the truth. Conspiracy theories flourished in hushed tones at diners and gas stations, with neighbors debating what really happened. The missing bus cast a permanent shadow over Riverside's identity. Outsiders whispered about the town as though it were cursed. Travelers would sometimes stop to ask locals about the story, curious to see the place where 20 children vanished. The questions always left residents uneasy, torn between shame and sorrow. Anniversaries of the disappearance became painful rituals. Each year, parents gathered at the school gym, lighting candles under the faded portraits of their missing children. The turnout grew smaller with time, but those who remained carried the same hollow look in their eyes, a reminder that the wound had never healed. By the late 2000s, new generations of police officers looked at the case like a legend rather than an investigation. Files grew yellow with age. Reports became harder to find, and many witnesses had either moved away or passed on. The trail wasn't just cold, it was frozen. And yet, despite being labeled forgotten, the case never truly left Riverside. It lingered in the silence of the woods, in the empty chairs at family tables, in a way older residents still locked their doors a little earlier at night. The bus and its 20 children had vanished, but their absence haunted the town in ways that could never be erased. The shocking discovery. It was a crisp autumn morning in 2024 when the silence of Riverside was broken. A group of hikers had wandered deeper into the woods than most dared to go. Their trail led them into a dense thicket where vines grew so thick they formed a wall of green. But behind those vines, something metallic caught the sunlight. At first, they thought it was just a rusted piece of old farm equipment. But as they pulled the vines aside, their hands froze. Faded yellow paint emerged from beneath the growth, streaked with rust and age. Then came the unmistakable curve of windows, the outline of wheels sunken into the ground. It was the bus. Bus number 57, the same one that had vanished 30 years earlier. Its once bright color was now almost swallowed by the forest, but there was no mistaking it. The hikers stood in stunned silence, unable to believe that they were staring at the ghost that had haunted the town for 3 decades. The discovery spread quickly. Within hours, police swarmed the area. Caution tape was strung across the trees, and investigators moved carefully around the vehicle as though it were a crime scene frozen in time. The forest, usually so quiet, now buzzed with reporters, cameras, and murmuring crowds. The bus was found only a few miles from the original route, a distance so close it was unthinkable that search teams had missed it all those years ago. It was parked between thick trees, shielded by natural overgrowth that had built up over decades, as though the woods themselves had been hiding it. Its doors were slightly ajar, creaking when the wind pushed against them. Inside, the air was heavy with dampness and rot. Dust covered the seats, but fragments of the past remained. School bags, notebooks, crumpled papers. On one seat, a child's drawing still clung by tape, faded but visible, stick figures holding hands under a sun. What unsettled investigators most was the emptiness. There were no bodies, no bones, no trace of the 20 children or the driver. Everything inside was abandoned in a way that felt sudden, as if everyone had simply vanished mid-journey, leaving their belongings behind. The windows were intact, the tires deflated but not destroyed. There were no signs of crash, no shattered glass, no blood. The bus had not been wrecked. It had been left there, intentionally or otherwise. The silence of the discovery was louder than any explanation. For the families, the news reopened old wounds. Parents now in their 70s and 80s came to see the bus for themselves, some collapsing in tears at the sight. For decades they had begged for answers, and now, though the bus was found, the children were still missing. The discovery gave them something tangible, but no peace. The shocking discovery of bus number 57 did not close the case. It deepened the mystery. How could an entire vehicle hide so close for so long? Who had left it there? And most terrifying of all, if the bus was found, then where were the children who had once filled its seats inside the bus? The investigators were the first to step inside bus number 57 after 30 long years. The door groaned as it swung wider, releasing a stale wave of air that smelled of damp wood, mildew, and time itself. Flashlights cut through the darkness, beams dancing across the forgotten interior that once carried the voices of children. The seats, once covered in bright vinyl, were now torn and weathered, eaten away by rot. Moss had crept in through the cracks, and vines had slithered along the windows, curling around the edges as though the forest was trying to claim the bus for itself. The silence inside was unbearable, like a tomb that had been waiting to be opened. Scattered across the floor were remnants of school life, frozen in time. A cracked lunchbox lay on its side, its faded cartoon characters barely visible. Pencils and erasers rested where they had rolled decades earlier. A notebook, its pages curled from dampness, still bore the faint writing of a child's homework assignment. On one seat, near the middle, a backpack leaned against the window. When opened, investigators found a small stack of trading cards, their colors dulled but still recognizable. Whoever had owned them had been just like any other child, dreaming of collecting, trading, and playing. Now the cards sat as silent witnesses to a mystery that refused to speak. The walls of the bus carried eerie traces of its past passengers. Stickers peeled from surfaces, initials scratched into metal, doodles faintly etched by bored children on the long rides home. One drawing, barely visible on the back of a seat, showed a rough sketch of a house and a family. Nobody knew which child's hand had made it, or if that child had ever lived to return home. The driver's seat added another layer of unease. Mr. Harold's cap, weathered and sun-bleached, still sat on the dashboard as though waiting for him to return. The steering wheel was stiff, locked in place by rust, and the keys were still dangling in the ignition. It was as if the bus had been abandoned mid-ride, yet no one remained inside to explain why. Investigators found no signs of panic, no overturned seats, no broken glass, no evidence of a struggle. The belongings left behind suggested the children had left suddenly, but not violently. It was almost as though they had simply stood up and walked out, leaving everything behind. But to where? And why? The floor carried marks that puzzled experts. Strange scuff patterns trailed toward the bus door, uneven and overlapping, as if dozens of small shoes had shuffled there at once. But there were no footprints outside, no trail leading away into the soil, no evidence of where those steps had gone after they left the bus. What disturbed the investigators most was the silence of it all. The bus was not destroyed, vandalized, or burned. It was preserved, hidden, waiting. It didn't tell a story of chaos. It told a story of vanishing. Every item left behind seemed to whisper the same question. How could so much be abandoned so suddenly? And by whom? The inside of the bus became the darkest riddle of the case. Every object told a fragment of a story, but none fit together. The backpacks, the drawings, the keys, the scuff marks, all of it was there, yet none of it revealed where 20 children and their driver had gone on that fateful day in 1994 to unanswered questions. The discovery of the bus raised far more questions than it answered. For 3 decades, people had demanded to know what happened, and yet when the bus was finally found, the silence inside only deepened the mystery. Every detail seemed to scream for explanation, yet none was given. How could such a massive vehicle remain hidden for so long, only a few miles from the original route? Search teams had scoured those very woods with dogs, helicopters, and hundreds of volunteers. Could they really have missed something so large? Or had the bus not been there all along? If the bus had been abandoned in the forest in 1994, why were there no footprints, no trails, no discarded clothing? 20 children and 1 adult stepping out should have left evidence in the soil, yet not a single trace remained. It was as though they vanished the very moment they touched the ground. The ignition keys hanging from the dashboard brought another puzzle. Why would the driver leave them behind? If Mr. Harold had been involved, wouldn't he have taken them with him? If he was innocent, then who stopped the bus and forced him to leave it in the woods without a struggle? The scuff marks on the floor troubled investigators most. They clearly showed that children had moved toward the exit, but where did they go after stepping out? Did someone wait for them in the woods? Did they walk willingly into the darkness, or were they led away by force? The belongings inside the bus were equally baffling. Why would children abandon their school bags, drawings, toys, and lunchboxes? If they had run, wouldn't they grab at least something? The fact that everything was left behind suggested they didn't expect to leave or weren't allowed to return. The question of time gnawed at everyone. If the bus had been hidden since 1994, how had it escaped detection during years of searches? And if it had been moved there later, who had the means to transport a school bus unnoticed? The logistics of it alone seemed impossible. The lack of damage also made no sense. If this had been an accident, the bus should have been wrecked, overturned, or burned. Instead, it stood intact, like it had been carefully placed and preserved. That detail made some wonder. Was the bus meant to be found only when someone decided the time was right? The disappearance of the children themselves was the most haunting question of all. Where had they gone? Were they alive somewhere, hidden for decades, or had something darker claimed them? The emptiness of the bus suggested a story, but it stopped just short of revealing the truth. The unanswered questions stacked higher than the evidence. Every new clue only unraveled into more uncertainty. The discovery that was supposed to bring closure instead reopened the nightmare, leaving Riverside once again staring at the same terrifying mystery. 20 children entered the bus that day, but why did no one ever see them again? The enduring mystery. Even after the bus was discovered, the mystery of Riverside refused to fade. Instead of closing the case, the finding of bus number 57 breathed new life into the fear, the whispers, and the haunting sense that something was still unfinished. The woods seemed to hold their silence tighter than ever, as though mocking those who sought answers. For the families, the bus became both a shrine and a wound. Some visited it in tears, touching the rusted seats as if they might still carry the warmth of their children. Others could not bring themselves to see it at all, afraid that standing inside would shatter the fragile hope they had carried for 30 years. The townspeople struggled to explain it. Some claimed the bus had been hidden deliberately, covered by branches and vines that grew thicker each year. Others swore it had not been there before, that it had appeared suddenly, like a secret finally allowed to surface. Both possibilities were terrifying in their own way. The investigators reopened the case, but time had stolen many chances. Witnesses had aged, memories had blurred, evidence had decayed. Those who might have known something were either gone or silent, leaving only fragments of rumors and speculation to fill the gaps. Theories began to rise once again, this time even darker. Some said the children had been taken far away and the bus abandoned as a decoy. Others whispered that the woods themselves had claimed them, dragging them into something unseen, something beyond explanation. The bus, now fenced off, became a site of uneasy pilgrimage. Curious strangers traveled from faraway towns to glimpse it, snapping photographs and whispering about curses and disappearances. To Riverside residents, it was both a reminder of sorrow and a symbol of what remained unresolved. At night, some swore they could hear faint echoes if they stood near the bus. Soft laughter, the thud of footsteps, or even the crackle of the old radio that once played inside. Whether it was imagination or something else, those sounds kept the legend alive, spreading far beyond Riverside. The case files grew heavier with theories, but lighter with evidence. Every attempt to answer one question only raised three more. Why was the bus so intact? Why were no human remains found? Why had the forest protected it so completely, almost as if it had wanted the bus to remain hidden until now? Generations shifted, but the story lingered. Children in Riverside grew up under the shadow of the vanished 20, told to beware of the woods, told never to trust the silence of the trees. The bus, even in its rusted state, became a permanent part of the town's identity. And so, the mystery endures, unanswered, unresolved, and unbroken. The bus was found, but the children were not. The past had returned, but the truth remained buried. 30 years later, Riverside still lives with the same haunting question. What really happened on that short ride home in 1994? Strange findings around the bus. When investigators widened their search beyond the bus itself, the forest revealed an unsettling layer of clues that had remained untouched for decades. Just a few yards away from the bus, carved deep into the bark of several old oak trees, were strange symbols, circles interlocked with jagged lines, shapes that seemed too deliberate to be random scratches. Some of them were faint with age, while others looked disturbingly fresh, as if someone had been maintaining them long after the bus vanished. The symbols didn't match anything familiar in law enforcement databases. They weren't gang markings, nor did they resemble common graffiti. Experts were brought in, some claiming the designs echoed occult rituals, while others insisted they were nothing more than crude attempts at distraction. But their symmetrical precision made it hard to dismiss the possibility of intent. Beneath the thick blanket of leaves and soil, searchers uncovered scraps of fabric, child-sized clothing faded and rotting with time, a sleeve torn from a shirt, the corner of a school uniform, even the strap of a small shoe. The most disturbing part was their location. These items weren't found inside the bus, but scattered carefully in the surrounding area, almost as though they had been arranged to mislead or to send a hidden message. One investigator noted that the fabric pieces seemed to form a rough trail leading deeper into the woods before abruptly stopping at a patch of moss-covered ground. When dogs were brought to the area, they reacted strangely, circling, whining, and refusing to move forward, as though something unseen repelled them. The soil near that patch revealed markings unlike anything else in the area. Wide, sweeping grooves etched into the dirt, as if something heavy had been dragged. Yet no one could determine whether it was a large object or multiple people moving in unison. The grooves ended suddenly, without continuing tracks, as if whatever caused them had simply vanished. Further inspection revealed the trees themselves carried scars beyond the symbols. Deep claw-like marks ran vertically up several trunks, the bark stripped away in patterns that did not match natural animal behavior. They were too high, too straight, too purposeful, Some investigators whispered that the trees bore witness to something unnatural. The deeper the team searched, the more disturbing the evidence became. A small rusted whistle was found near the base of a tree, the kind teachers once used during playground duty. Nearby, buried under years of damp leaves, they found the remains of a tin lunchbox with faded stickers still clinging to its surface. Each artifact tied directly to the missing students, but none gave clarity to their fate. One discovery shook even the most seasoned officers: a child's notebook, miraculously preserved in a sealed plastic cover. The first few pages contained spelling exercises and doodles, but the last page had jagged writing across it, hurried and uneven. The words were smudged but still legible enough to read. "We can hear them outside. Don't open the door." The finding of the notebook turned the mystery darker than ever. Who had written it? A student? The driver? And who, or what, were them? Was this proof that the children had hidden inside the bus before leaving? Or was it a warning that something sinister had surrounded them in the woods that day? The forest around bus number 57 no longer seemed like a passive backdrop, but a stage set with deliberate clues. The carvings, the fabric, the strange grooves, the chilling note, all of it suggested that the disappearance was not random, not accidental. Someone, or something, had been here in 1994, and perhaps, just perhaps, it had returned since then.